So thank you for coming to our ArtStop today. We are here in the San Diego Museum of Art's portion of Behold America, but obviously it's a collaboration between 3 museums. So you have the Timken Museum of Art next door and the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego up in La Jolla that also have portions of the exhibition. And we are fortunate enough to have figures. So our museum is filled with the aspect of the exhibition of looking at how portraiture has changed in 300 years through American art. And the topic of today's ArtStop is identity in contemporary photography. And I was just thinking sort of about how we start tackling that really big issue of identity. And we've already set one parameter on every single artist in this show, obviously. Everyone is American. So it actually seemed even more appropriate than if we're calling these artists American, which is very easy in sort of a nationalistic sense. What does that really mean? What is Americanness now? So we'll start here with James Luna, who actually has a biography that wraps in with the San Diego area. He lives on the La Jolla Reservation in North County, and he was born to a I'm going to check my notes, make sure I don't mix up which way it is, to a Mexican father and an Indian mother. And so here we have this work where he's sort of playing on the codes of what is Indianness and what is Mexicanness. Of course, we start with this panel all the way to the left here. James's hair is very long. His earring, his Native American earring, is very prominent, sort of playing on this idea, this code, these visual clues. What is Indianness? So we can sort of read this image as James portraying his Indianness. Of course, if you go all the way to the other side, James's hair is cut, almost greased back here. He sports a mustache, and again, he's playing on these codes of identity, again, and here specifically with Mexicanness or Latino-ness. Now, he's also presenting these, of course, we can't ignore, in sort of a mugshot style, sort of this taxonomy, almost reading like a handbook of identity. This is how you identify this type of person, this is how you identify this type of person, so forth. When we get to this middle image, though, we have 2 halves, and it's really not a whole. I mean, this is an absurd image of a man. These 2 different halves do not come together to actually add up to something cohesive, to a nice, neat package. And it's interesting to also think about this work as proto-filmic. So if you think about the film strip, you think about this series of still images. That's really all films are on a film strip, is this series of photographs. And so when you think about a film, you even think about a narrative, this overarching narrative. And again, here, instead of this narrative that comes to a nice ending in the middle here, sort of these 2 things adding up, it's definitely the postmodern take on a story. And that 2 things can be true at the same time, but they don't necessarily add up in an equation to some greater truth that is equally half of these 2 things. And really, this is the idea of interpolation, which I really had to look up the first time I saw that in an essay about James Luna's work. But this idea of inserting something different into 2 other like things to disrupt meaning. So again, when we're thinking about this work as 2 different images supposedly adding up to something whole in the middle here, this is more about interpolation. This is more about disrupting that meaning. This is more about saying these 2 things don't necessarily add up. And I think what you're seeing here is, do we have an artwork where James Luna is talking about himself personally, that he's struggling with these 2 different identities? No, not necessarily. This is more about James using his own body as a stand-in for these are our ideas of of how we recognize who certain people are. And this image in the middle, this sort of absurd image, is trying to disrupt that meaning. Let's actually start to work on these stereotypes. Let's actually start to work around these traditional meanings that are more accepted codes in our visual culture. So again, the middle image, we're looking at this mugshot sort of framework here for presenting the work, and the middle image, of course, is also the one that looks out at you. And so we do feel most implicated as viewers, I think, with this center image. We're here. James, we can stare at him all we want. Again, sort of feeling like that taxonomy handbook where we're looking at the depictions of different people. Here, James is looking back out at us, and this becomes this really amazing, challenging image where we're sort of more aware of our own perceptions when looking at the work. So James Luna was here at the museum and gave a fabulous talk as part of our symposium on the entire exhibition. So it's always great when you don't just have to take my word for it or the art historian's word for it, but you can hear from the artist himself. So I want to encourage all of you, if you go onto the museum's website or to our YouTube account, you can find the entire symposium, was video recorded, it's online, and I encourage you to listen to James talk about his own work, which is fascinating. He is planning on updating this piece now after 30 years to do a new version of it. As he says, I used my own body for this work, and my body has certainly changed a lot in those decades, so he's anxious to do an update for that. Next, we're going to go look at the work of Lorna Simpson, even more large-scale photography than James' work, right this way. Quite a rare commodity sometimes for museums, which is a comfortable bench. So I encourage you guys to come, take a seat on the bench right here. We can all be friends, come close. You will hear Dennis Oppenheim's piece, The Bell, going off approximately once every minute, and it's fantastic. We did have concerns at the museum, oh, would this be too much of a distraction? And what we find is so many people coming over to this side of the exhibition to see what's happening. So it's been great to have that work as part of the exhibition, but that will be going on as we talk. Here we have Lorna Simpson. Again, since we're talking about identity in contemporary photography, I'll just throw out a little bit of her biography, which again, like James Luna, wonderfully ties in to the San Diego region. Lorna Simpson is a graduate. She got her MFA at UCSD in the 1980s. She had her first one-person show at an alternative gallery in downtown San Diego. And she was just a part of the scene here in the 1980s. So Lorna Simpson has that San Diego connection. Here, this work from 1989, Guarded Conditions, which we have the text saying the same up top, is balanced out by some text at the bottom. Sex attacks and skin attacks repeated over and over. Now, of course, sex attacks and skin attacks sort of reaffirms the identity of this person that is in the photographs. So sex attacks referring to violence committed against women, and skin attacks referring to violence committed against persons of color. So here reinforcing that this is a woman of color. Now, again, just like James Luna, it's very easy to think, especially with a work that's talking about identity, that this is Lorna Simpson. In fact, it's not, and even if we thought it was meant to stand in for one person, here is an instance where the formal qualities of the art really reinforce the conceptual underpinnings of the work, in that these are all photographs that are stitched together very consciously, but the artist knew going into it that they were going to want to take this series of photographs of one person, 3 at a time, and put them together. So it is a composite of a person. In the artist's own writing, she has referenced this person as a sentinel. So we can think of this person as a guard, as watching over something, and you see that each of the women are on sort of this plinth or this platform, and we can sort of make this pretty easy allusion to a guard standing on a post or on a watchtower or something like that. Of course, their backs are to us, and they're looking out on something, and we don't get to have a very clear illustration, something laid out nice and neat in front of us, what that thing is, that concept is that they're guarding against. And that gets us back to sex attacks and skin attacks. Of course, I I encourage all of you, whether you want to do it right now while I'm talking or if you want to come back and spend some time with the piece, to actually sit and read all of this, even though it's the same two phrases over and over again. Read them and see how long it takes you to read them and start thinking about this repetition. Because really what the artist is talking about is that that is the history of women of color in this country, is that over and over and over again there's this repetition of attacks, of violence against people of color and against women. And so in this case, repetition is almost this way to literally hit home that this is a paradigm, that this is not, an instance that comes and goes, that this has actually sort of been the paradigm in this country. Lorna Simpson, again, just bringing her biography back into it, was bused to a different school when she was growing up, and she talks about how sometimes getting on the school bus was really hard. These mobs of white folks would form around the different school buses and sometimes try and block the kids from getting on the bus, and so the bus driver would have to sort of go around the block and try and pick up the kids as they were running onto the bus. She does insist that that's important for her in terms of how she's grown up as a person, but in speaking about this work and this vein of work, that it's not biographical about her, but more that her biography has informed her overall opinion that allows her to make these works, trying to be somewhat more objective in how she's going to approach this subject matter. But Guarded Conditions, again, is monumental photography. So James, Luna, that we just looked at, we had the headshots. Now here we have a full figure, and they are life-size. And the point I want to make about this is that in the 1980s, what some people have started to write about is that this is this moment where photography really starts to compete with painting in terms of scale. And it turns out that helps photography compete in terms of value too, in terms of value at market, but also in terms of it's being more prominently featured in exhibitions, in museum shows, things like that. So when we look at James and then we go to the full figure here, I want you to also think about that as we move over to Tina Barney, who is constructing these huge tableaus of many figures within a space. So I encourage you, like I said, to come back and spend some time with this piece and really read the text and let that sink in a little bit too. But right now we're going to finish with Tina Barney. So we have had an artist who is of Native American and Mexican descent. Now we've looked at Lorna Simpson, who's an African American woman. And here we have Tina Barney. And she is also talking about identity and biography. And I just want to start off with a quote about her work. These are Tina Barney's words. When people say that there is a distance, a stiffness in my photographs, that the people look like they do not connect, my answer is that this is the best we can do. This inability to show physical affection is in our heritage. So Tina is talking about her heritage and her community, and that is the sort of social elite of New York and certainly New England. I mean, these are the blue bloods. These are the people who trace their family to coming back on the Mayflower. These are rich and powerful people, and of course overwhelmingly white as well. Now Tina is born in '45, and when she's about 25, 26, she starts collecting photographs, but it's not until the mid-'70s, until she's about 30 years old, that she actually starts taking photographs. Now what she was really interested in early on was the snapshot. She had a bunch of little cameras, and she would just go around, she would take snapshots. Now she was really just comfortable taking snapshots of her world, of her close family and friends. And as she decided to get more and more serious about photography, what she realized she wanted to do was use this large format camera. And that meant the snapshot was out the window, because when you have a large format camera, you're not going to run around a party, and these are very serious pieces of equipment. So she resigned herself to the fact that she was going to be setting it down in one place and taking a photograph that way. Now, certainly what we have here, though these are staged photographs, what we have here is you can see some remnants of her snapshot aesthetic, in that she still wants to try and create the sense of capturing these sort of everyday scenes around the house, or this sort of like moment that it appears she's sort of just happens to zero in on. But they are, of course, staged, and she is going back to this exciting moment in the 1980s for photography. She is one of these first people that's really taking on a directorial role in the photograph, meaning she has assistants that are coming in here and helping her with the lighting and helping arrange everything and helping with the technical aspects of the camera and all that. And what she's really doing is making sure that everything's sort of arranged the right way, and the mood and the feel of it is right, and she is sort of capturing what she wants to overall. Here we have Jill and Polly in the bathroom, and this is Jill, the artist's sister. This is Polly, the artist's niece. And we do sort of, I keep using that word tableau, but we do sort of have this scene in which we kind of can look at the sink, for example, and think of things, are we interrupting the scene, and all these things just happen to be there, and maybe it's messy, and certainly if you went over for a dinner party, all of this would have been cleaned off the sink. On the other hand, we can think back to this tradition of European oil painting and sort of putting out every little object on the table for a still life, or for somebody's portrait, to have their instrument and some of their valuables on the table next to them, sort of show that they are people of means and wealth. And while I'm not saying that the artist directly wanted to do that, that there is sort of this tradition that informs her work in possibly thinking about how to construct the photograph. Of course, it's wonderful here, this tension between the mom and the daughter, and they're wearing these almost matching robes here, and one wonders who made that decision, and if that's a source of contestation. But we also have this moment where the mother is returning the view of the camera, and the daughter sort of looks like, get me out of here, I don't want to be in the middle of this. So it's one almost wonders, as this woman who's sort of parting the drape right here so that you can see all the way back, and not just that they have a nice backyard, and not just that they have a picket fence, but that even Fido has a house of his own. So you sort of have this presentation right here by one of the figures, and almost this desire to get out of the frame by another figure. Again, this all goes back to this idea of snapshot. There's not a perfect posing for the camera, and also of this sort of everyday exchange. This is not some climactic clash between the mother and the daughter. This is everyday family relations. This is us getting on each other's nerves every single day in all the tiny little ways that we do every single day. So it is this incredible push and pull between a staged setup and sort of this snapshot aesthetic. As we close here, I'm just going to pass around another set of photographs by Tina Barney, and they're of the same father and daughter, and they're 10 years apart. And so in one, you see Tina in the 80s, Tina Barney, taking this very directorial role in constructing the scene and making this wonderful setting. And then 10 years later, the two figures are merely just standing there, both looking right back at the camera, and not very glamorized. And so what Tina started to do as she followed these families over the years, and she saw the families change, she also wanted to try and have her own practice evolve. And so she's actually gone back to more of the snapshot aesthetic, instead of setting up the scene, more just asking the two people that she photographed before to come back, be photographed again, and she lets them sort of dictate how they want to be photographed. So she's backing off a little bit in terms of her role of director, but certainly that has been her legacy, and this is a wonderful example of it here. So that's just a little, brief discussion into the concepts of around identity and contemporary photography, and hopefully it will get us thinking about these images in some different ways when we go around the gallery and see the rest of the work. So I'll stick around if anybody wants to hang out and have questions, but otherwise, thank you so much for coming.